G'day, Ben from Duck Plain Chicken here with the second video of the UC Hardgraph Platoon Briefing Set. So off camera I have done a lot of painting and I just want to quickly cover what colours I actually used. If we start with the instructions, they've sort of given a couple of colour schemes. The one in the main painting guide is sort of a cross between a blue and a green. In the anime, of course, it's quite blue, which is closer to sort of what they've got up here. But they've sort of brought in elements of green. I wanted to go with more of a sort of jungle theme or something that was a little bit moving away from the blue. And so what I've gone with is this light green colour. Now there's a couple of things happened. I've done the painting, I've laid the decals down, and I've given it a gloss coat. So a lot of this stuff I've sort of done off camera. You've seen me do it before. It's nothing special. I just wanted to sort of talk about the colours. So for the main, the bulk of the vehicle, I've used this light green, which is German yellow green from SMS, these SMS lacquer acrylic paints. And then for some of the details I've gone with a darker green, so underneath the rotor shrouds or whatever these are called. And for that I've gone with German olive. And so there's sort of, you know, a little bit of detail on this thing as well. So for the gun, I've gone with a German grey, so I didn't go with black, I went with a really dark grey. And what I'll do is I'll dry brush a little bit of silver over this. So for the view screen, I painted that first with Model Air steel, and then over the top of that I used Ammo by MIG Crystal Periscope green, which is a clear green, just to give it a little bit more of a sort of view screen appearance. And there's also some other sort of details that I've put in here. You can see the little radio boxes in there. So for the buttons, I painted them in steel first, and then I used a combination of the Periscope green and also some Tamiya clear orange and Tamiya clear red over the top of them. So that's how I sort of got that effect. For some of the additional details, I used olive green, Vallejo Mica colour. And then I've got some grey that I've used as well, so I've got this sort of lighter grey, and for that I used gunship grey. So I've sort of used a combination of, you know, different colours, but it's all pretty monotone. It's you know, nothing sort of leaps out. It is a military vehicle, so it kind of makes sense to keep it, you know, not make it too garish. Now for the gloss coat, I used clear gloss, and then I put down all the decals. Now there are decals in this kit, and but there's not that many. So there's a couple sort of on these rotor things. It's like a no step marking. There's a couple of sort of tiny little markings that go on these arms. There's a few markings that go on this ground penetrating device or sound location device. So they're just a few sort of warning stickers, warning labels. There is an identifier that goes on the turret and also on the side of the hull. Now I haven't gone with the standard scheme. I've gone with, they provide two schemes for the decals, so I've gone with the second one. But as you can see, there's not a lot of decals on this kit. So, but they all went on. They were all pretty straightforward. I've started the process of dirtying up the pieces, so basically some chipping, some sort of splatters, that sort of thing. So I'll quickly show you how I do that. This is probably a little less subtle than my previous UC Hardgraph kit, but it will tone down quite a bit once I start putting some other environmental effects on it, like dust and mud. So I'm going to start with this piece here. As you can see, nice and clean compared to this one that's been seriously grubbied up. I use a combination of different paints to build up the layers. So the first one I start with is this Vallejo Model Air Duck Egg Green. I kind of find it's a nice lighter colour. I could envisage that this colour would be the undercoat. And then on top of that, I use a bit of light gold grey, so just to give it a little bit of variation. For some really light spots of rust, I use the Mecha Colour Chipping Brown, 69035. And then finally, I will do some very small touches of steel, just where the scratches have sort of gone all the way through to bare metal. Now, I'm sort of, as far as the story of this goes, this vehicle for me, it is still a vehicle that's in use, that's in military use, so therefore it wouldn't have degraded to a point where it's basically rusting in a field. So the rust and the cut through to the steel is probably, very minimal. It's really just about the other chips and splatters you might get along the way. So what I do is I take a kitchen sponge like this and just tear off a small piece. I use some of these clamping tweezers. I take the sponge, and then I'm just using a tile here. I'll take a little bit of paint. As you can see, I had a bit of an accident there, poured out way too much than I needed. I'll dab off most of it, because remember, this stuff it actually goes a long way. And then what I want to do is sort of try and pick out just the edges that would cop the most abuse. So certainly, these are the arms that sort of tuck up under the vehicle, so you would expect a lot of chipping or potentially mud splatter. And you might have a few directional scrapes. Once I put filters over this, it'll be knocked right back. And my understanding for doing effective weathering, it's all about the layers. You don't want to sort of do it all in just one hit. Now what I'm going to do is move to the gold grey, just to give it a little bit of variation, the different layers of paint that the scratches might go down to. Next step is the chipping brown. So this sort of gives a bit of a slight impression of surface rust. can be a lot more subtle. We'll try to be, because that gives the focus. That sort of gives it the more of a chipping look. Alright. The other thing I like to do is sort of look at, look at the pieces I've done previously and sort of just check to make sure they sort of look, similar. Now this thing would cop a lot of, battering because it's actually at the front of the vehicle. So I think that looks alright so far. Now the last thing I'm going to do is just a hint of steel. So I really just want to put that in some very few places where it's sort of all the way through to the bare metal. Now again, this is pretty subtle, so it'll get knocked back with oil washers and filters. And so that's the first stage of the weathering process. Pretty rough, but that's alright. Filters will knock it back, but I do all the chipping sort of first before I start getting into all the washers. Alright, so I'll go ahead and do the rest of the vehicle, and then when we come back I'll be doing some panel line work. I've done all the chipping, and so the next thing I'm going to do is do the panel lines, and I'm going to use panel line accent colour dark brown. So I don't want to go with the black, I want something that looks like mud's got caked into all the crevices, so I'm going to give it a good shake. And you've seen me do this a number of times before, nothing different, and just literally tap it to the line and let capillary action do the rest of the work. Those little bits of mess there, I can go back and clean them up, but it just helps to bring out some of that detail. So if we have a look at side by side comparison, So you see the one on the left's got the panel lines, whereas the one on the right doesn't. And so it helps to just bring them out a little bit more. So I'll go through, do the rest of the panel lining, and then I'll do the cleanup. I won't film that, that's pretty straightforward. I just use shellac to clean it up, or usually decanter it into a small bottle like this. But you can use enamel thinners as well, it'll do the same thing, it'll just clean up any of that excess panel line wash you've got in there. So after I've done all the cleaning and everything, I'm going to give everything a matte coat, and then I can start on the filters and start on some of the sort of final weathering layers. I finished the chipping, the panel lining, cleaned all the panel lining up, and then gave everything a matte coat. And the reason I gave it a matte coat is because the next step, which I'm going to take you through now, where I'm using oils as a filter, I want the pigment to actually stick to the surface. I don't want it to just wipe straight off like it would with a gloss surface. So I've given everything a matte coat so that the oils have something to stick to. So for the filtering process, what I want to do here is I want to bring it down into more of a brown tone than a green. So there'll still be some of the green come through, but I want it to be a little bit more brown. I also want some hints of sort of streaks of mud and stuff as this thing's gone through the jungle. So I'm going to put some streaks in while I'm at it. So the oils that I'm using here are these 502 Abteilung oil paints, but you can use any oil paints as long as they're decent quality artist oil paints. The cheaper ones tend to have way too much carrier oil in them and don't work as well. So, but Winsor & Newton or anything like that. So just get yourself some decent artist oils. So I'm using what's this one? Brown Wash, ABT 080. I'm using Dark Mud, ABT 130. And I'm also using ABT 093 Earth. If it'll focus. There we go. So they're the three main ones I'm using. I also was going to use some Snow White, but I've done a bit of the other pieces and I find I don't need it. I actually put probably too much of the duck egg green on the chipping, so all these sort of areas here, and I probably all these areas here, so I probably don't need any white. So what I do is I get all the oils on sort of a bit of a palette, bit of cardboard, doesn't matter. The great thing about oils is they take forever to dry, and so you can sort of leave them out, they'll be fine. And what I'll do is I'm going to take this piece here, and I've got just a series of toothpicks that I use to just dab on the paint, but you can use a paintbrush. And so I'm just dabbing on in random sort of areas, just a little bit. I'll do this bit as well. And then I'm going to take a bit of the light brown colour. I know this kind of looks a little bit like rust, so I'm going to kind of position it where I think a bit of rust might appear. And I've got the darker colour, so I'm sort of just dabbing it on. Not going too heavy. You don't need too much of it. It doesn't matter if you put too much on. It's fine because you can take it off again. So what I'm using to thin it all down is odorless thinners used for oil paints. And just a warning, because this stuff does take a long time to dry, you really don't want to be throwing anything over the top in a hurry. I find that oils, they can take forever to dry, so you just need to be mindful of that before you put anything over the top. So I've just poured some of those, some of the odorless thinner in a cup here. I've got a soft brush, fairly wide brush. I'm going to load it up with the solvent, and I'm just going to wipe off a bit of the excess on paper towel. And then what I want to do is run the brush in the direction of which the streaks and the mud would sort of occur. So I'm just brushing down. And as you can see, it's pretty stark at the moment. But as I work it more, now I'm pretty rough and ready with my filtering and streaking. There are modelers out there who do a lot better job than me, but at least you can see how I get the result that I'll end up with. Alright, so if we look at that now, it is still wet, but it will dry matte. Okay, so I've got too many sort of fine streaks in there, so what I'm going to do is maybe grab another brush. Yeah, that's a bit better. This is just a dry brush, just to help get rid of the those really obvious sort of almost uniform lines. Alright, so that looks well and truly muddied up. Now if you compare that to the other side, you can see how it's just taken it down to sort of that real brown colour. We've got some sort of streaks coming through. Yeah, but it is just night and day. So I am a lot happy with that. Now what I'll do is I'll just run this under a hairdryer a bit just to dry it off a little bit, and then come back and show you what it looks like. Now I've just run it under the hairdryer for a bit, but you can see that it's still a little bit wet in places, still a bit of oil paint, but let's just sort of get an idea of the kind of finish of what it'll look like. So it is substantially muddier than and dirtier than what it was. And to give you another example, I have done the base, so you can see that that is muddied right up, and if you compare that to the top where it's nice and clean, and of course the top won't be as sort of as filthy as this, but you get an idea just what it looks like over a bigger surface. And of course I've just put my fingerprints on it, it's still drying off. Again, just be mindful that this stuff takes a while to dry, so you don't want to be handling it for a while. We'll pick up paw prints, unfortunately. So the next thing I'm going to do is do the filters, do the oil filters over the rest of the sub-assemblies, and then it'll be time for maybe a little bit of pigment powder. I may be using some of these, the Tamiya weathering powders, and so that will bring us pretty close, I think, to finishing the vehicle off. I've finished all the filtering and streaking effects just using the oil paints, and I'm pretty happy with the results. It's a bit hard to get all on screen at once, but you can sort of see the level of weathering. Probably a bit overdone in some places, but I don't know, I think it's to my liking. Now I've got it sort of sitting on some paper towels just at the moment because it hasn't completely dried, So one thing you'll notice here is that the canopy on the back is super clean, so I need to dirty that up, and I'm going to use some pigment powders for that. I'm also want to use just a little bit of the these Tamiya weathering powders just for these exhausts here. So I think I might end up just using probably this oil stain. So this is from Set D. I'll move this out of the way a little bit. So all I'm doing is just getting a little bit on the applicator here, and I'm just going to brush it on. I don't want to go overboard, but I want to give a bit of an indication of maybe a little bit of soot or a bit of grease or oil or something coming out the back here. So as you can see, it just gives a little bit of extra detail. Now the next bit is to dirty up the canopy, and what I want to do is I want to do that in a box so that I don't get the pigment powder all over my workspace. Okay, the weathering powders that I'm using are these Vallejo pigments. So I'm going to use natural umber and just a little bit of old rust. So I just want to give an idea of sort of a bit of dirt that's been caught on the canopy, so it doesn't look super clean. And what I'm using is a makeup brush. Don't ask me what they're used for, but they're just a nice soft makeup brush, so I can get a little bit of pigment on the brush and literally just brush it on. Because I put a matte coat on, the pigment will stick to the surface a little bit better. And so you can see, just trying to get in the light, it is pretty subtle, but there's a little bit more brown sort of in the top here. Alright, pretty happy with those two things. So now I can put that together and attach it to the vehicle. Okay, so that looks way better now that it's got a little bit of brown on it, so it makes a bit more sense. It's also got a slightly different sort of look to it from the armour. Getting close on some of the chipping and stuff that I've done here. I've tried to make the filtering and the streaking more predominant on the lower portion of the hull, so that's on the rotors and the rotor guards, also on the front and back, but you can see on the top it's a little bit lighter as far as the streaking and the filtering goes, so I just thought it would make more sense that it's going to be dirtier at the bottom. Now there are a couple of pieces that I have not put on the vehicle, and I want to talk a little bit about why. So first of all, I have these little pieces here, which are the brackets for holding on the instrument on the side tip this up. You can see there's two little half brackets there, and these two bits are the other halves. Now they're supposed to be positioned underneath, so it looks like they're sort of opened up. So it's supposed to look like something like that, so that the bottom half would come up and clamp with the top half. But I'm actually going to leave them off, and the reason for that is because they're just going to be way too delicate. There's only a very small point that they're going to be attached with glue, and I'm very concerned about the fact that, you know, if I glue them in place and I want to pose it a slightly different way, I'm going to knock it off. The other thing that I haven't done, and I didn't even paint these up because I knew there was just no way I was going to get these done without them breaking off. So these are the external mirrors, the wing mirrors, and they attach to these bars here, and the attachment point is small, and not only that, it's not particularly, doesn't match up particularly well. So I knew that there was no way that I was going to have those go on and them not breaking off at some stage, so I didn't even bother. I also thought, in truth, the external mirrors, they're kind of in a strange place. I don't know how effective they would actually be on this vehicle, so I've just chosen not to put them on. So they'll go in the spare bits bin. And but that's essentially where the vehicle is at. It's basically done. I just need it to sit and dry, and so I'll leave all the glamour shots until the next video after I've done the figures. And of course the next video will all be about the figures and the other little details like the table and chairs that come with it. But essentially the vehicle's done. I just need it to dry properly, let all the oil paint dry properly, and then it's good to go. So at least while I'm doing the figures, this will have a chance to dry a little bit more. So till the next video, I'll catch you later.